Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Allison, and I'm so glad you're here to discover what brings out the best of you. This podcast is all about breaking free from painful patterns, mending the past, and discovering our true selves in God. I can't wait to get started as we learn together how to become the best version of who we are with God's help. Hey everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of The Best of You. I'm so glad you're here with me this week. This is a conversation I've been wanting to bring to the podcast for a long time because I see this tension showing up again and again in the lives of people all around me, in friends, in people I work with, and in many of you who write to me. Family can be a source of both incredible support and also of deep pain. In fact, today's episode builds directly on last week's conversation with Jerry Wise, where we talked about self-differentiation, which is just the essential process that we all have to go to of learning to stand in our own sense of self, even as we remain connected to the people we love around us. And that process of self-differentiation is something we all have to navigate, but it's particularly challenging in the context of a family that doesn't support you, that doesn't do their own work, that doesn't want to go down the path of growth with you. And so today we're going to zoom in on one of the most painful and complex phenomena we're seeing in our culture today. It's estrangement within families. Over the holiday weekend, I was traveling and I downloaded some episodes of the television series Parenthood to watch on the plane. And I love that show. I think there's just a lot of profound moments in the series. But at rewatching it, I was struck by how often family relationships include moments of rupture. Even the best parents who are trying so hard to stay attuned to their children overreach, overextend, cross boundaries, make mistakes, misinterpret, misunderstand. There are so many moments of rupture, even within the best families. And that show does a beautiful job of portraying both the many ways that we hurt each other in families and the power of those moments of repair when they happen. Just those simple moments of repair when a parent says to a child, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I messed up. I didn't see you." Or when a child says to a parent, "I'm sorry, I messed up. I made a mistake. Will you forgive me?" Those moments of repair are just so powerful in a family because healthy parenting and healthy relationships aren't about never messing up. They're about the willingness to repair. But what happens when repair isn't possible? What if a parent won't or can't, for whatever reason, own the harm they've caused? And what if you're a parent who's been cut off by an adult child and you've never been given a chance to repair? Is estrangement the only way forward, or is there another path? As I've worked at the intersection of psychology and religion these past few decades, I've noticed that people of faith in particular often go to two different extremes when thinking about these questions. We often assume you just simply have to honor the commandment to honor your father and mother. But on the other extreme, especially in our broader culture today, we're seeing a rising number of adult children cutting ties with their parents altogether for reasons that aren't always clear or at times that may not warrant such a permanent decision. And it can start to feel like these are the only two options: to remain enmeshed and hurt, or to walk away entirely. And that's why I wanted to talk with today's guest, Dr. Joshua Coleman. Josh is a psychologist and one of the leading voices in the country on the topic of family estrangement. He brings such a rare depth of insight, not only from his work with families, but also from his own experience as a father who went through a season of estrangement with his adult daughter. His books, When Parents Hurt and Rules of Estrangement, offer a compassionate, deeply nuanced look at how these rifts occur and what it might take when both parties are willing to begin the long work of repair. Whether you've ever wondered what it really means practically to honor a parent who's hurt you, or you're someone who's been cut off from your child and aching to understand why and what you can do about it, or if you're just trying to navigate the complexities of family without swinging to either of these reductive and overly simplified extremes, this episode is for you. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Joshua Coleman. One of the reasons, Josh, that I just really wanted to have you on today is you speak with such nuance to this topic of family estrangement. A lot of my audience, by way of introduction, comes from faith backgrounds. They've grown up in churches. Many of my listeners belong to churches. So one of the things I want to kind of flesh out with you today on the podcast is what I see as sort of these extremes. In my work, as I have been working as a clinician in some of this area, in my own degrees in psychology and religion, sometimes in religious communities, there can be a sort of honor thy father and mother. Almost you have to stay loyal to the family system, even when the system is hurting you.
Yep.
And so a big part of my work is reframing that. What does it really mean to honor a father and mother, especially when there's been harm? What does that really mean, right? When we need to differentiate and disentangle from that. On the other side of that, we're seeing, and I'd love for you to speak to this in the broader culture, especially in the younger generation, just an incredible number of people kind of divorcing their families, for lack of a better word, for maybe not necessary reasons. And there's this sort of alienation and isolation, and we're going too far to sort of leaving some of these institutions and systems that we do need some tether to. So that's kind of how I came to you. I thought, gosh, who is speaking to this in a way that honors that sometimes we do need to address what's hard in families of origin, and also we don't want to kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater. So with that long preface, I'd love to hear from you. What are you seeing in the culture at large, and how did this topic become of interest to you?
Well, we'll start with how the topic became of interest. It was through a personal experience. I was married and divorced in my 20s, and I have an adult daughter who I'm very close to. But there was a period of time in her early 20s where she'd cut off contact with me for a couple of years, in large part owing to my becoming remarried, having children in my second marriage, and her feeling in many ways displaced. And when she wanted to talk to me about it, to kind of complain about what that was like for her, I wasn't really well equipped to listen as empathically and as responsibly as I should have. And so she became more and more distant until she stopped talking to me. And it wasn't until I really realized I needed to radically change how I was approaching her that she began to turn back towards me, and we were able to heal the distance. But at the time, there was nothing written to help me, and I was in therapy with, very successful psychoanalyst who gave me terrible advice, as so many therapists do in this space. Because if you haven't been through it, you kind of just don't know. So I realized that there was a need for a book on the topic. So I wrote my first book on the topic in 2007, When Parents Hurt, Compassionate Strategies When You and Your Grown Child Don't Get Along. And as a result of that, got a wide following of parents here who were estranged in other countries. And as a result of that, started doing a free Q&A every other Monday because I just couldn't handle the volume of emails I was getting. Then I started doing a webinar series, which I continue to this day, every Tuesday night, 4:30 Pacific. And I have a newsletter, which is also free because there's just so much information parents need. And I don't want to limit it just to people who can, afford my private therapy rate. So on the basis of all of that data, I did a survey of 1,600 estranged parents, which I published in several peer-reviewed articles, and wrote my more recent book, Rules of Estrangement, Why Adult Children Cut Ties and How to Heal the Conflict. And so now all I'm doing is seeing estranged parents, mostly and adult children who are interested in reconciling and that kind of thing. But to back up to your second question, what am I seeing? Yeah, I think that there's been an enormous cultural shift in the past half century where, honor thy mother and thy father, respect thy elders, families forever, has given way much more to this emphasis on personal happiness, personal growth, identity, protecting my mental health, establishment of boundaries. And so often the generations are talking past each other. Older generations are saying, well, what about honor thy mother and thy father and everything that I did for you, and respect your elders? And younger generations are saying, no, that ship has sailed. It's really like, you can't have a relationship with me that's in line with my ideals for happiness and mental health. not only don't I want it, but it would be ridiculous of me to have it. So a lot of my work is helping parents learn how to speak that language because so many of them haven't been raised with that language. And so many of them say, my kids saying they were emotionally abused. I can show them what an emotional abusive household looks like. I grew up in that. What they got was a walk in the park, which, doesn't really advance their cause.
Might be true on one hand and is not helpful toward the ends of reconciliation.
Exactly.
So I want the listener to hear, you've got some fantastic resources for parents who have experienced estrangement where their kids, adult children, have cut ties. Before we get there, I'd love to hear your take, because you have such a nuanced approach. When do you think estrangement is warranted? When do you think it is appropriate to cut ties?
Well, in the same way that I would tell parents that it is their duty to do due diligence on their children's complaints and to find the kernel, if not the bushel of truth, and to understand why their adult child is turning away from them and what they're trying to establish in doing that. I think adult children also need to do their due diligence with the parents. It's not enough to go to therapy and have your therapist say, well, your mother's a narcissist, your dad's a narcissist, or they can't be helped, or it's hopeless. You actually have to be willing for your therapist to contact the parent and see if they're willing to work on it, or do family therapy, or give your parents time to grow and change, and not to approach them by saying, my therapist thinks you're a narcissist, or I learned that you were emotionally abusive. I mean, it's fine to have all of those beliefs. Many parents are abusive, and it's not like those parents don't exist, because they do, but it's not going to really motivate or allow the parent to give you what you want or may need from that parent in order to be a better parent, or even heal the hurt and the harm that they've caused. It's really hard for any parent to hear the ways that they failed their children. And defensiveness is it's an unproductive response, but it's a very natural response. So if your goal is a better relationship with your parent, you really do need to spend some time giving them time to change and to tell them what you don't like, and to kind of let them know if they're not getting it, look, I just can't have a relationship with you if you can't be more sensitive to me in this regard, whatever it is that they're being so insensitive about. And if over the next few months you're not able to show more empathy or insight around this with me, then I need to take a serious break from our relationship. Now, when I counsel people to take a break, I don't really think anybody should take a permanent break, because I think that sometimes parents don't get the message until there's been an estrangement. It's kind of like some parents need to be sort of, smacked upside the head to get with the program. But then once they've actually been through it, they can kind of say, oh, okay, I get it. I'm willing to do whatever, right? So I think, adult children should reach back out after a year. And part of the reason I say that is that, there's so much in the media about abusive parents. There was an article yesterday or Sunday in the New York Times about another person who cut off their abusive mother, and they're happy for it. And there's that book by Jenny McCarty, I think, called I'm Glad My Mother's Dead. And there's so much in the media about kind of legitimizing estrangement. And, like we're saying, there are cases for it. But there are so many estrangements that don't occur because of parental abuse. And there's not enough information out there about how heartbroken these parents are and how heartbroken they are as grandparents, because they're typically cut off from contact with the grandchildren as well.
Yeah, it's really polarized. It's as if there's only two options: relationship or no relationship. When I talk about boundaries, I'm a big proponent of, let's face reality. Let's name what's real. What can I do? Can I send a monthly email update? Maybe that is the only way I can have a relationship, right? But there's a lot of material in that middle ground between no contact ever, 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 and we have to spend every holiday together and talk on the phone every week. I think most people don't fall in either of those two extremes.
No, I totally agree with you. And I think that because of cell phones, every parent is just, a click away from their children in ways that wasn't the case when you and I were growing up. I'm sure I'm quite a bit older than you. But, my parents, when I moved out here to California from Dayton, Ohio, it took me 2 weeks to drive out here with friends. And I wasn't like calling them every other day or sending them pictures. And I couldn't send them pictures. Maybe after 2 weeks, I called them collect and spoke to them for 10 minutes to let them know I arrived safely. But now parents can reach their kids from anywhere in the world within seconds. And it really crowds the environment for so many adult children. And so many kind of feel like they're getting too much. So the word that I see in every single letter from every single estranged adult child is, you need to respect my boundaries. And part of it is just that parents are allowed and have been more intrusive in some ways. It comes from a loving, caring, anxious, guilt-ridden place. But you're on the other end of it as the adult child. It doesn't necessarily feel that way. It just feels like intrusion.
Yeah. There are lots of boundaries you can set that, like you're saying, I think that's really a good point in this modern era of don't follow me on social media. And I can enforce that. You don't get to say, or, I won't do text relate. There are lots of these. So I just want to put that out there for a listener. And again, there are cases. I have friends, I've had clients who have to go no contact for very good reasons. That does happen. And also, there are many situations where we can find a more nuanced approach. If you're part of the 30% of Americans who grind their teeth at night, your smile needs protection, and Remy makes it easy. Remy's custom-fit night guards are the best solution I've found. They're dentist quality, but 80% less expensive and so much more convenient. Here's how it worked for me. They sent an impression kit straight to my door with super clear step-by-step instructions. I made my mold in minutes, sent it back, and a few days later, my custom night guard arrived, perfectly made for me. I started wearing it immediately, no more waking up with jaw pain or worrying about long-term damage, and it's so comfortable I forget it's even there. Remy is so confident you'll love the fit, they offer a 45-night perfect fit guarantee or your money back. No waiting rooms, no big dental bills, just a smarter, more affordable way to protect your teeth while you sleep. Try Remy risk-free at shopremy.com/bestofyou and use code bestofyou to get up to 50% off your night guard at checkout. That's shopremi.com/bestofyou with code bestofyou. Thank you, Remy, for sponsoring this episode. Okay, can we just take a second and talk about how confusing nutrition has become? I mean, I'm someone who knows quite a bit about health and healing, and I still find myself asking, what does my body actually need today? Some days I feel great, and others I'm just tired, bloated, and I'm like, what is this? Is it stress? Is it hormones? Is it my lunch? It can be so confusing, and that's why I was so grateful to discover Faye Nutrition. Faye connects you one-on-one with a registered dietitian, someone who really gets how food and body are connected and who can help you tune in to what works for you. Here's the best part. Faye takes insurance. Most people pay $0 out of pocket. So whether you're navigating fatigue, PCOS, food sensitivities, or you're just done with all of the conflicting advice out there, Faye can help. Having a personalized nutritionist used to cost big bucks, but not anymore with Faye. Listeners of The Best of You can qualify to see a registered dietitian for as little as $0 by visiting faynutrition.com/bestofyou. That's faynutrition.com/bestofyou, and make sure to use that URL so they know I sent you. So a couple of things you've said that are really important for adult children who have a tough relationship with their parents or recognizing ways they've been hurt. I loved how you said this. You said a couple of things. Don't just talk to one therapist who has only met you and only heard your story. See if that therapist would be willing to meet with your parents. Maybe try family therapy. It might not work, but kind of look at it from different angles. It's a big deal is what I'm hearing you say. It's a big deal to just completely cut off. And so I hear you saying, give it some weight, give it some discernment. And then I heard you say very clearly, do it for a specific period of time first. If you feel like, man, this is going nowhere, they are not hearing me, give it a year. I heard you say even, take a year and just say, I need this time. And then we'll revisit because, it's almost like a timeout.
No, it is like a timeout. That's well said. And it gives everybody a chance to calm down. And it gives parents a chance, hopefully, to realize that you mean business if you're the adult child doing it. And I think it's really helpful for parents to know that the adult child is going to reach out within a certain time, because so many of the parents I work with are like, well, what if I never hear from my child again? What if I never see my grandchildren? And what if how will they know that I've changed? I am changing. I am doing therapy. I now see, but how will they ever know that? And so, I think giving the parent another chance is really critically important.
Yeah. If you don't mind my asking, how did that happen with your daughter? Was there a set period of time and then you decided to re-engage?
Well, I was sort of trying to re-engage, all the way through. I just wasn't doing a very good job of it. So it wasn't until I talked about the situation with the consultant to my practice. I mean, if your listeners may know that as therapists, we often have a consultant who we bring our difficult cases to, every week to get advice. And so one time I just said, look, I want to talk about a really difficult case, and that's me, and I want to get your advice. And she was really the first person to say, you need to shut the heck up and stop defending yourself and start explaining and stop being defensive and stop getting mad and just empathize and take responsibility, because you're not doing that. So it just feels to her like you're really not hearing her. So, it really wasn't until then that things began to shift. And I think it's true for many parents. It's not necessarily true. It's not, for the parents who are out there, it isn't like any one thing I can advise is going to work for every single parent. Sometimes the adult child just isn't ready for a variety of reasons. But being willing to take responsibility, make amends, not be defensive, hear it from the child's perspective, those are really the key necessary steps, even if they're not sufficient.
So let's talk about this. Part of what we're talking about here is power. Right? A parent has power over a child as they grow up, which is why those wounds can be so damaging, because as children, right, there is a power differential. And what happens as we become young adults is, and suddenly like, oh, we have some power here, which isn't all bad, right? I have some power here to say, I'm not okay with this. And so then the parent is scrambling to go, okay, now do I still have power? Do I use my old means? How do I change? And so I can imagine this is where parents whose kids are coming to them saying, this isn't working, really can get stuck to your own point of your own story. So let's start there. How would you coach a listener, a parent who is in that kind of rumble? They're wanting to defend. They don't like it. They feel disempowered. So they're doing all the wrong things in a way to try to get some of that feeling of control. So let's go there. What are some of the wrong things that we do? And then what are the things we can do?
Yeah, well, the most wrong thing you can do is to fail to realize that nothing compels your adult child to have a relationship with you beyond whether or not they want to have a relationship with you. So it's going to necessarily be on their terms. You're not going to have the same kind of power that maybe your parents had over you, or maybe you feel like you should. And if you were a better parent than your own parents were, and you were generous and helped your child in all kinds of ways, you may feel entitled to a certain degree of power and influence over them. But your adult child get the final say on whether or not they're going to be in relationship with you. So complaining about it probably isn't going to work. And being willing and able to shift into this newer model of family, which has more in line with romantic relationships than it does with prior parent-adult-child relationships, meaning it has to be sensitive to the other person. It has to take place in a context of personal growth. It has to be identified with that person's goals for happiness and their mental health, et cetera. Or the adult child's going to say, well, I'm not willing to play by those rules, so see ya.
Okay, so first of all, understanding this is a new playbook of family. My young adult children are operating in many ways under different norms than I was. And so just accepting that, radical acceptance. This is the reality.
This is reality. Yep.
And so to the parent who's hearing that going, but that feels like I'm giving up, it may feel like at first you're sort of surrendering, but that would be part of the parent's work, is then to go talk through what that stirs up in them with another therapist, with their own therapist.
Right. No, it's true. And not to overdo the parallel between romantic love, but, when we fall in love with somebody and we marry them, part of what we have to do is accept the ways that we can't get them to change. And we have to accept their limitations. And we have to accept that they're not going to be able to meet every need of ours. And they probably aren't necessarily going to be able to do all the things that we want them to do, et cetera. And the same is true if we want a close relationship with our adult children. That may require a certain kind of grieving that the relationship isn't going to look like what you wanted it to look like. And if your kid has issues, if they have mental health issues, or if they're married to somebody who's troubled, or you're divorced and your ex is poisoning them against you, or the therapist has persuaded them that everything's your fault, you're going to have even less power. So you have to really come to terms with that.
Yeah. And coming to terms with that, I would say the first way to do that is not to try to get your young adult child to understand that, unfortunately. You're going to have to come to terms with that through processing the grief. I like how you use that word grief. Just as in a marriage, when you realize, oh, this person is not who I thought they were, you don't necessarily want to process that with them initially. You need to grieve that with someone else if you want to keep the relationship intact.
Exactly. Yeah, they're very similar in that way. And we all have limitations, we as parents and our children as well, in terms of what they can provide for us. And, I do think that because parents have largely done a better job and spent more time raising their children, probably spent more money than prior generations, I think that they kind of come into the adulthood sort of hoping and assuming it's going to be a really close relationship where there's going to be a lot of gratitude. And, it's just kind of luck of the cards. I mean, maybe you're going to get that, maybe you're not. But if you're not, you can't insist on it because it's just going to turn your child away.
So what role does apology and accountability play for a parent? So we've accepted new terms, maybe done some work. What does the role of apology and accountability play in rebuilding an estranged relationship?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I always tell parents if they're estranged to start by writing a letter of amends where they take responsibility, where they find the kernel, if not the bushel of truth in the children's complaints, where they don't try to explain it, they don't defend themselves, they don't blame other people. It's just kind of a straightforward, I could see how this would be healthier for you to do or why you have based on these actions or behaviors on my part. It's not an easy thing for parents to do, but that kind of courageous accountability can be much more compelling to an adult child than, that something that's the parent doesn't go there and just sort of insists that the adult child's being mean or unfair or not, being appreciative of all the things the parent did for them. So accountability and amends, which, may not necessarily even be an apology per se. I mean, some parents really don't know why the adult child has cut them off. And what I always tell parents is to say is something like, well, it's clear that I have significant blind spots as a parent or as a person that I don't have a better understanding, but I would like to know more. And would you feel comfortable writing me or telling me? I promise to listen or read purely to understand, not to defend myself. Or if you want to do family therapy, I would welcome that as well. So, just kind of like it's a big sort of invitation to talk more and be close, but close in this new, much more kind of psychological way.
Yeah, and really meaning that. Part of the radical acceptance is you're not dangling that as a hook. You've got to be ready because that does take some core strength to be able to set aside our own ego and to really honor that no matter how unfair I think this is, there's definitely going to be kernels of truth. And being really willing to own all that, has that fine line of having the dignity of your own personhood while still honoring the mistakes that you've made.
Yeah, I know. What I tell parents is it's about humility, not humiliation. And I'll sometimes see on some of the forums parents saying, well, I'm not going to grovel. And Coleman expects me to just keep apologizing and apologizing. And, I'm not apologizing for anything. I didn't give that kid an incredibly good life. And that's why I say it's about humility, not humiliation, because humility basically says that we all do have blind spots. So we may feel like we could even objectively look like we were a great parent, and our kids could objectively feel like they wish we'd done something different, been much more involved or much less involved, or pushed them harder or didn't push them as much, whatever it is, and sort of just insisting that they're wrong and you're right. I mean, that doesn't persuade anybody. Like if we just go back to the couples model, I mean, it's all about empathy and understanding. It's not about who's right and who's wrong. So that's why I think it's useful for parents just to go, look, I guess I have blind spots that I wasn't aware you felt that way, but I'm glad you told me. I'm sorry that my behavior caused you to feel so, whatever it is, hurt, neglected, misunderstood, et cetera. But it is hard for parents. Not all parents can do it because some parents will say, well, what about my own integrity if I'm apologizing for something I didn't do? And if the things you did do, which if you're like every single parent in the world, there are things that you did do, you should start there for starters. But if you don't really understand, it's just basic humility to say that there are clearly things that I got wrong.
And in any relationship, I think, my kids are entering into young adulthood, and I try to make a regular practice of going to them and saying, I'm so sorry. I was kind of a jerk last night. You're modeling something at the very least, and I try not to do that to get something from them. I try to do that because it's true, and it's good for me. And regardless of whether they care, half the time they're like, I didn't really care, or, And so I think also parents can look at it as this is good for me. It's good for me to embark on a journey of a really good, healthy practice of, I love that, humility, not humiliation. This wasn't great. And it's good for me to say that too.
No, you're right. It's not only good role modeling and good parenting, it actually feels better ultimately. As hard as it is to write an amends letter, as hard as it is to apologize or to try to repair or be accountable, ultimately, what stays in the dark grows in the dark. Most of us know the kind of mistakes that we made with our children, and particularly if it's with a child who's, turned away. it can be therapeutic to just call a spade a spade. Go, yeah, hell yes, I was that way. That's why in AA, I think it's the 8th step, they talk about make a fearless and searching moral inventory of your character flaws. And partly it's because in AA, they know that all the things that you keep in the dark stay in the dark and have this kind of corrosive effect on your self-esteem and resilience.
I love that reference to AA. I work in a lot of IFS, and we talk about taking the U-turn. No matter what it is, no matter how painful it is, there's always an opportunity to look inside yourself. Along the lines with AA, there's always that opportunity to go, what can I take a look at? There's always something, and that is actually for my good. Hopefully it will restore this relationship. Yeah, I love that. Step in AA is a great reference.
Yeah, it's so important, that ability.
You know how some guys are just impossible to shop for? That's my dad. He's thoughtful, steady, always giving, and never asks for anything. Growing up, he was the one who made home feel safe. Even now, just being around him brings a sense of calm. So this Father's Day, I wanted to give him something that gives that back. Something that says you deserve the best. Cozy Earth's bamboo sheets were the first thing that came to mind. They're incredibly soft and they keep you cool all night long, which for my dad is a game changer. I'm also eyeing the all-day tee and everywhere pant because if anyone deserves to feel completely comfortable at home, it's him. And the best part, it's a risk-free purchase. All of Cozy Earth's apparel items come with a lifetime warranty. Cozy Earth makes comfort that lasts, and this Father's Day, he deserves it. Go to CozyEarth.com and use code BESTOFYOU for 40% off all men's apparel. For the dads who work hard during their 9 to 5 and deserve the best during their 5 to 9. What would you say to parents who feel like they have done everything that they can, and their child just isn't going to engage? They're just gone. What would you say to those parents?
Well, I have a lot of those in my practice because not all adult children are able and willing to reconcile no matter how perfectly the parent has reached out to them, including with my guidance sometimes. And I tell them, well, we have to help you to not have it be a blight on your life, which is harder for moms in particular. Moms, tend to feel like, well, there must be something else I can do, and if I can't solve this means I'm not only a terrible mother, but a terrible person. And I say, no, you have to reclaim your life. Your kid gets a vote, but you're the CEO of your life. They don't get to be the ultimate decider about who you are as a parent, as a person. And a lot of parents, moms in particular, will also sort of turn away from the former things that gave them value and meaning because they feel like, well, what right do I have to a happy life if I don't have my child or my grandchildren in it? It is going to be a life with a certain degree of pain in a certain way. You have to, again, it's radical acceptance. It's like having a chronic backache or something, or some other kind of a medical condition, or maybe you're in a bad marriage, you can't leave or don't want to leave. And so there's sort of a chronic feeling of unhappiness and dissatisfaction that's just a part of your life. You just want to make sure that it's not the only part of your life or that it doesn't define you and become the whole part of your life.
That's good. That's well stated. And this is true for all of us who are parents. It is true for all of us. We do have identities separate from that role. It just takes it to another level. And there is, again, that word grief, that ongoing grief. I would love to just end on a note of, as we're kind of talking about some of what's hard, why is this relationship worth fighting for? Both for young adults of parents and also for the parents. Why is this valuable? And why is it that we're losing something a little bit when we move too far away? Again, I get that sort of the pendulum swings of culture. There was a lot of enmeshment. We weren't allowed to name things that were hard in families of origin years long before I was born, right? So then now we're just going to kind of blow up the system. Why is this worth fighting for? And why is it important?
I don't never need to convince parents of that because they already know because there's so much pain. But for the adult child, well, there's several ways to think about it. I mean, one is the vast majority of adult children, when they cut off contact with a parent, they cut off access to the grandchildren as well, to the parent who's the grandparent. And often they say, well, it's not good for me. It's not good for my kids. And there's a lot of people who are really, really good grandparents who maybe weren't that great as a parent, but they can still bring enormous value to grandchildren. And some of these grandparents were very involved in the grandchildren's lives before they were cut off. And so, they're actually hurting their own children by cutting off access to a loving, decent grandparent, A. B, it also can allow the grandparent the ability to repair some of the ways that they might not have been as good as parents, and that might be good for you to see that they can do that. Although some adult children say, well, it's sort of infuriating for me in a way to see how good they can be with my own kids. How come they couldn't be there, for me in the same way? And it's kind of like, well, it's a different role being a grandparent. But also if you cut off access to your parents and their grandchildren, it makes families more fragile. It means that your children probably aren't going to have as much access to their cousins because typically estrangement is a cataclysmic event, meaning that not only grandparents and grandchildren, often if the parents are still together, it can create a lot of tension in the marriage. Cousins may get cut off from seeing other cousins. Siblings typically become divided, some with the estranged child sibling, others with the parents. So it's a pretty serious event. And I think it just makes people that much more. Some people say, no, best thing I ever did. I feel so much happier and more resilient. If you go on some of the forums like Reddit, that's not an uncommon thing that you see. Now, whether that's going to be true, in 10 years or so, whether that's going to be better for their children, I don't think we know. My general concern is that as a society, we're becoming much too kind of diffracted and atomized. We have rising rates of mental illness. I think that's in part because there's this ongoing feeling of mistrust. We're very preoccupied with our own boundaries and not thinking as much about kind of the more independent nature of identity. And so I think we're suffering as a society by this. Again, yes, there are legitimate places for estrangement, but I do feel like, particularly people in our field these days, I feel like are a little too quick to recommend it or endorse it or not provide enough tools towards reconciliation.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to you, Josh. It's in some ways the same invitation for the parent is for the young adult who's grieving what they didn't get from a parent, is that sort of radical acceptance, is that sort of resilience of I may never get what I really wanted. And then that process of kind of shedding what I maybe even deserved from a parent and didn't get. And again, we're not talking about extreme situations here because those do exist, but also the muscles and the internal core strength that comes from, again, that more nuance of boundaries that we kind of do with our friends sometimes, where there's sort of that, you kind of come up with a new category. This is a human that matters. I'm connected to this human. Maybe I let go of this idea of mother or father that they weren't, and that's just what's true. And I can kind of adopt this other way. Like there's some creativity, right? When we honor that there is something to those bonds that do matter. And we all have to kind of go through that process of kind of that dance of our individuality, but our connectedness, that both things are important.
No, I think it's super well said. And I like how you're framing it that, there's a lot of growth that can happen in learning how to be with a parent who isn't your ideal, who didn't really raise you in the way that you wish that you had, and landing on a compassionate note with that, kind of like they really did the best that they could based on their own traumas or deprivations or who they were married to or their socioeconomic status or, or who we were as children, because children they're not like neutral players in this. There are, difficult children who bring their own temperaments to the equation. So it's an opportunity. If your goal is personal growth, and I think younger generations, that is their goal, then this provides you with a really rich opportunity to learn how to be in the presence of your parent and not be so triggered and not have to be so rigid about your boundaries and your limits and all that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's an invitation to growth. That's a pretty sophisticated skill of emotional intelligence, right? To be able to understand what's hard. Again, I think about the parts model. Like a part of me is really unhappy here, and also I can lead myself through it. And that's really a great feeling too. That's very liberating because there's a lot of difficult people in the world.
There are, right. And I think in some ways it makes us less resilient if we're just constantly setting boundaries. It looks empowered. It looks virtuous. I'm cutting off these toxic people. I'm only surrounding myself with people who love me. But first of all, it doesn't make you more resilient. We know from cognitive behavioral research that the things that make you anxious or afraid, you're better off kind of going towards and learning how to tolerate those feelings rather than to just kind of never, involve yourself with them. And I think the same is true with our family relationships.
Well, I so appreciate all these resources you're providing. Tell my listeners where they could find you if they want to take advantage of some of these great things you're doing.
Sure, yeah. Probably the best place is my website, www.drjoshuacoleman.com. That's drjoshuacoleman.com. I just started a Substack recently called Family Troubles, so you can find me on Substack. But my newsletter, you can sign up for my free newsletter on my website, and that goes out, 4 times a week, and it's got lots of free articles in there about estrangement, and so there's other things that I'm doing or, podcasts, et cetera. So that's probably the best place to find me.
That's great. We'll link to all that in the show notes. I'm just so grateful to have come across your work and grateful for what you're doing.
Well, thank you. It was really great to talk to you.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of The Best of You. It would mean so much if you take a moment to subscribe. You can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts and click the plus or follow button. That will ensure you don't miss an episode and it helps get the word out to others. While you're there, I'd love it if you leave your 5-star review. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday. And remember, as you become the best of who you are, you honor God, you heal others, and you stay true to your God-given self.